There's a comforting myth about small towns. We imagine them as quiet havens of familiarity and safety, places where everyone knows your name and people look out for one another. But that very familiarity can curdle into something else, something suffocating and sinister. In a place where everyone knows your business, there are no secrets, and there is nowhere to hide when things go wrong. I grew up in Harmony Creek, a town so small that our biggest event of the year was the annual Fall Harvest Festival. It was a picture-perfect slice of Americana, held in the sprawling fields behind the old Grange Hall. Every October, the town would come alive with the smell of cider donuts and kettle corn, the sound of a local bluegrass band, and the sight of families carving pumpkins. For the past 5 years, since I was 16, I'd been tasked with running my family's jam and preserves booth. It was a tradition. I knew most of our customers by name, and there was a certain comfort in the familiar rhythm of it all. Setting up the checkered tablecloth, arranging the jars of strawberry jam and apple butter, and making small talk with neighbors I'd known my whole life. The booth was situated at the edge of the festival grounds, right where the manicured field gave way to a vast, unharvested cornfield that belonged to the Miller family. The festival ran from Friday to Sunday. The first day was always a bit slow, mostly locals stopping by after work. The weather was perfect that year, crisp and clear with a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. I was restocking our popular spiced peach chutney around 4 p.m. when I first saw him. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, near the entrance to the corn maze, partially obscured by a large oak tree. He was dressed as a scarecrow. That in itself wasn't odd. People often wore costumes to the festival, but his was different. It wasn't a cheap store-bought outfit. It was disturbingly authentic. He wore a faded, patched-up flannel shirt, grimy overalls, and work boots caked in mud. Straw poked out from his sleeves and collar, but it was the head that was most unsettling. It was a genuine burlap sack, cinched at the neck with a thick rope, with a crudely painted face on it. 2 large, vacant black circles for eyes and a jagged, stitched-on grin. He wasn't participating in the festival. He wasn't talking to anyone or buying anything. He was just standing there, unnaturally still, his head tilted slightly in the direction of my booth. I tried to ignore him, assuming he was just part of the festival's haunted attractions. But every time I glanced up over the next hour, he was still there, a silent sentinel at the edge of my vision. A little shiver of unease trickled down my spine, but I brushed it off. It was his stillness that was so off-putting. While the rest of the festival was a swirl of motion and sound, he was a fixed, silent point. The strange feeling intensified the next day. Saturday was the busiest day of the festival, and our booth was swamped from morning till night. In the chaos of selling jam and making change, I almost forgot about the scarecrow. But then around dusk, as the crowds began to thin and the festival lights flickered on, I saw him again. He was no longer by the corn maze. He was closer now, standing near the hay bale seating area, a mere 50 feet from my booth. He was still just watching, his burlap face a blank, unnerving mask in the growing twilight. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't a coincidence. He was intentionally positioning himself where he could see me. I tried to catch the eye of a passing festival organizer, but he was gone when I looked back, vanished into the throngs of people. I felt a prickle of genuine fear now. I began questioning myself. Was I just being paranoid? Was it even the same person? I tried to convince myself it was just a strange coincidence. I was busy for the next hour, and the incident slipped to the back of my mind. Just before closing, as I was consolidating the cash box, I noticed something on the corner of my table that hadn't been there before. It was a small, crudely made doll, fashioned from a dried corn husk and tied together with twine. It had black buttons for eyes. It was a simple, rustic-looking thing, but it sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I hadn't seen anyone leave it. I had been at the booth all day. My mind immediately flashed to the scarecrow. I scanned the festival grounds, my eyes darting everywhere, but he was nowhere to be seen. I quickly swept the doll into my bag, not wanting to look at its vacant button eyes a moment longer. That night, after my parents picked me up, I looked out the car window as we drove past the festival grounds. The main lights were off and the field was dark and deserted, but in the faint moonlight I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the cornfield, just behind where my booth had been, a motionless silhouette against the tall stalks of corn, watching the empty space I had occupied just hours before. My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just creepy. This was targeted. This was threatening. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't know how to explain the formless dread that was consuming me. Sunday was the final day. I begged my mom to let me stay home, feigning a headache, but she insisted they needed my help. The entire day was torture. I felt a constant crawling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. Every tall person in the crowd, every shadow, seemed to morph into his shape. But he didn't appear. All day there was no sign of the scarecrow. A small part of me started to feel foolish, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. As night fell and we began packing up, I felt a wave of relief. It was over. My parents left in their car with most of the equipment, leaving me to pack the last few boxes into my own beat-up sedan. It was around 10 p.m. The festival grounds were almost completely empty, save for a few other vendors breaking down their stalls on the far side of the field. The air was cold and silent. The only sound was the crunch of my own footsteps on the dry grass as I made trips to my car, parked at the edge of the gravel lot that bordered the vast, dark cornfield. On my final trip carrying the heavy cash box, a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A loud rustle from the corn just a few yards away. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The wind wasn't blowing. The rustling came again, closer this time. Then silence. I stood there, paralyzed, straining my ears in the oppressive quiet. A single cornstalk at the edge of the field swayed, and then he stepped out. The scarecrow. He was real and he was here. He stood there for a moment, his painted-on grin a grotesque slash in the moonlight. He didn't make a sound. He just started walking towards me. It wasn't a run or even a menacing stride. It was a slow, deliberate, unhurried walk. The walk of something that knows you have nowhere to go. Pure primal terror broke my paralysis. I dropped the box, the jangle of coins lost in the pounding of my own blood in my ears. I scrambled for my car, my fingers fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel was getting closer. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Heavy, steady, relentless. I ripped the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed the lock. As the engine roared to life, my headlights flashed on, illuminating him completely. He was just 10 feet away now. He stopped, his head tilting in that same unnatural way. He just stood there watching me as I slammed the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, spraying gravel everywhere. I didn't look back until I was miles down the road. I never went back to the Harvest Festival. My parents were confused and angry when I refused to explain why, but I couldn't bring myself to relive it. A few weeks later, I heard some local gossip that Old Man Miller was complaining that one of his family's antique scarecrows, one that had been in his field for generations, had gone missing that same festival weekend. They never found it. I moved out of Harmony Creek for college the next year and never looked back. But sometimes, on a quiet autumn night, I'll take out that cornhusk doll I still have hidden away in a box. I look at its black button eyes, and I can still see him stepping out of that cornfield, his stitched grin illuminated in my headlights, walking toward me with that slow, patient certainty. And I know that some small-town traditions are better left undisturbed. After I dropped out of my second year of community college, I needed a job, and I needed one fast. In a small town like Port Blossom, options were limited. So when I saw a posting for a night security guard at the County Historical Archive, I jumped on it. It seemed perfect. The pay was decent. The hours were 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and the duties were simple. Walk the perimeter, check the doors and windows, and make sure no one broke in to steal 100-year-old tax records. The building itself was the oldest in town, a former courthouse made of imposing gray stone, with tall arched windows and floors that creaked with the weight of history. During the day, it was a quiet, dusty place frequented by genealogists and local history buffs. At night, it was just me in the silence. For the first few months, the job was exactly what I expected, mind-numbingly boring. I'd do my rounds at the top of every hour, a process that took about 20 minutes, and spend the rest of the time reading, listening to podcasts, or trying to stay awake under the dull, buzzing glow of the fluorescent lights in the main security office. The building was a labyrinth of shelves, packed with decaying books and boxes of brittle documents. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, dust, and wood polish. The only sounds were the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional groan of the old building settling. It was an easy, solitary existence, and I was content with it. The profound silence was peaceful, a welcome change from the noise of my everyday life. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night in late winter. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol, walking through the dimly lit basement archives. This was the creepiest part of the building, a vast, low-ceilinged room filled with rolling stack shelves that you had to move with a large metal crank. The air down here was always cold and damp. As I was walking down the main aisle, I heard a faint sound from the far end of the room. It was a soft, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump. I stopped, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and listened. The sound stopped. I figured it was probably just the ancient plumbing or the heating system kicking on. I continued my patrol, sweeping my light across the ends of the shelves. Nothing was out of place. I dismissed it, but the sound had put me a little on edge. The silence felt heavier afterward. A week later, I started noticing things were being moved. It was subtle at first. I'd be in the security office and come back to find a pen that had been on the right side of my desk was now on the left. A book I'd been reading, left face down, would be closed. I accused myself of being forgetful, of being overtired. It was easy to lose track of small details on a long, monotonous night shift. But then, the misplaced items became more specific and more personal. One night I left my keychain, which had a distinctive silver carabiner, on the desk while I went on my 3 a.m. round. When I returned, it was gone. I searched the entire office, my frustration mounting. I finally found it an hour later, during my next patrol, sitting on top of a display case in the second-floor local history exhibit, right next to a black and white photo of the town's founding family. There was absolutely no way it could have gotten there by itself. I started to feel a growing sense of unease. I was the only person in the building. The doors were all locked and alarmed. I checked the security logs every morning. No unauthorized entries, no alarms tripped. Was I sleepwalking? Was the isolation finally getting to me? The incidents became more frequent. I would hear faint whispers that sounded like they were coming from just around a corner, but when I'd check, there was nothing. The soft thumping sound from the basement returned, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like the gentle scraping of a wooden chair being dragged across a stone floor. I started to dread my patrols, my hand constantly hovering over the heavy mag light I carried, every creak of a floorboard making me jump. The peaceful silence I once enjoyed now felt menacing, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to turn my back. The situation came to a head on a rainy Friday night. The sound of the downpour against the tall, arched windows made the old building feel even more isolated. Around 1:30 a.m., I was in the security office watching the grainy black and white monitors when I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the camera feed for the main reading room, a vast 2-story chamber with a mezzanine balcony, a book fell off a table. It didn't just slide off. It flew off, as if swiped by an unseen hand, landing on the floor with a silent puff of dust in the low-resolution footage. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. There was no one there. The room was empty. I rewound the footage and watched it again. And again. There was no logical explanation. It wasn't near event and the windows were sealed shut. Something or someone who I couldn't see had pushed that book. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of terror and a strange, desperate need for confirmation. I grabbed my mag light and my walkie-talkie, my hands trembling, and headed towards the main reading room. I had to see for myself. The hallway leading to the reading room was long and dark. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the marble floors. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The room was just as I had seen it on the monitor, cavernous, silent, and empty. The only light came from a single security lamp on the far wall, casting long, distorted shadows from the tables and chairs. I swept my flashlight beam across the room. There, on the floor, was the book, an old leather-bound county ledger lying open-faced. My breath hitched. This was real. As I stood there, a sound from above made me freeze. A single, distinct creak from the wooden mezzanine that encircled the second floor. I snapped my flashlight beam upward, scanning the balcony. It was empty. The railing cast a spiderweb of shadows on the ceiling, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and weak in the immense space. "Is anyone there?" Only the drumming of the rain replied. I started to back out of the room, my nerve finally breaking. I had to get out, call my supervisor, call the police. As I turned, every light in the building, including my flashlight, went out. I was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The emergency lights, which should have kicked on instantly, remained dark. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I was blind, and then I heard it. A footstep. On the mezzanine directly above me. And then another. It wasn't the sound of an old building settling. It was the slow, deliberate, heavy tread of someone walking along the balcony, their weight making each floorboard groan in protest. Creak. Pause. Creak. They were moving towards the staircase that led down to the main floor. I didn't wait to hear another step. I turned and ran blindly through the darkness. I crashed into a table, the pain barely registering. I scrambled up and kept running, my arms outstretched, feeling for the doorway. The footsteps from above quickened, now descending the stairs, each tread echoing louder and louder, closer and closer. Felt like a nightmare, the kind where you're trying to run but your legs feel like lead. I finally found the door frame, fumbled my way into the hall, and sprinted towards the security office. The footsteps were in the main hall now, right behind me, echoing on the marble. I burst into the security office, slammed the heavy door, and fumbled with the deadbolt, the click of it locking into place the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I huddled under the desk, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. I could feel a presence on the other side of that door, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, the main power surged back on. The fluorescent lights in the office flickered to life with a loud buzz, and the monitors blinked back on. I stayed under that desk for another hour, too terrified to move, before I finally got the courage to call the police. They found nothing. The doors were all still locked from the inside. The windows were secure. There was no sign of forced entry. The book was still on the floor of the reading room. The official report cited a power surge due to the storm. I quit the next day. I couldn't explain what I had experienced without sounding insane, but I knew what I heard. I knew I wasn't alone in that building. I still live in Port Blossom, and every time I drive past the old county archive, I feel a cold knot form in my stomach. I think about the oppressive weight of all that history, all those forgotten lives packed onto those shelves. And I know, with absolute certainty, that some things from the past don't just want to be remembered. They demand to be heard, even if it's just in the slow, deliberate footsteps of something walking in the dark. When my wife and I decided to move out of the city, the town of Silver Creek seemed like a dream come true. It was a small, picturesque community with tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and a reputation for being one of the safest towns in the state. We bought a modest but charming two-story house in a subdivision called The Pines. The neighbors were incredibly welcoming, bringing over baked goods and offering to help us unpack. It felt like we had found our forever home, a place where we could raise a family in peace. On our first weekend there, we were introduced to Dale, the head of the neighborhood watch. He was a man in his late 60s with a friendly smile, a firm handshake, and an almost zealous passion for community safety. Everyone spoke of him in glowing terms. Dale keeps this place safe, our next-door neighbor told us. He doesn't miss a thing. At first, Dale's attentiveness seemed like a charming small-town quirk. He'd be out on his morning walk and make a point to stop by. "Morning. Just noticed your garage door was left open all night. Wanted to make sure you knew," he'd say with a helpful grin. Another time, he knocked on our door to let us know a package had been delivered to our porch. "Wouldn't want anyone swiping it," he said, tipping his Silver Creek neighborhood watch cap. We thanked him, genuinely appreciative. It felt good to be in a place where people looked out for each other. But as the weeks turned into months, his helpfulness started to feel less like community spirit and more like unnerving surveillance. The comments became disturbingly specific. "Saw you folks got that new landscaping done. The river rocks are a nice touch," he mentioned one afternoon, peering into our backyard. We hadn't told anyone we were doing it. He must have been watching the landscapers all day. Another time, he caught me taking out the trash and said, "Looks like you had a bit of a party last night," gesturing to a few extra pizza boxes in our recycling bin. We'd had 2 friends over for a movie. It wasn't a party. It was just a quiet evening. But Dale knew. He always seemed to know. My wife thought I was overreacting. "He's just a lonely old man who cares about his neighborhood," she'd say. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were always on our house. My unease grew when I started noticing his car, a nondescript beige sedan, parked at the end of our cul-de-sac at odd hours of the night. If I got up for a drink of water at 2 a.m., I'd peek through the blinds, and there it would be, sitting under the dim glow of the streetlight, occupied by a single, motionless silhouette. The first time I assumed he was on patrol, but it happened again. And again, always in the same spot, always for hours at a time. Then came the notes. They were typed on a slip of paper and left tucked under our doormat. A friendly reminder from the neighborhood watch. The motion sensor light on your back porch appears to be burned out. Or your dog was barking for 15 minutes at 3:12 a.m. Please be considerate of your neighbors. The notes were anonymous, but I knew who they were from. The slightly condescending, overly formal tone was pure Dale. The feeling of being constantly monitored began to suffocate me. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I started keeping the blinds drawn, even during the day. I stopped sitting on our back porch. My wife had to go out of state for a week to care for her sick mother, and the thought of being alone in that house filled me with a deep, gnawing dread. I made sure every door and window was locked before I went to bed that first night, my heart pounding at every creak of the house settling. I felt foolish, but I couldn't help it. Dale's constant presence had eroded my sense of security completely. It was on the third night of my wife being gone that my worst fears were realized. I was in the living room, watching TV with the volume low when my dog, a golden retriever named Cooper, suddenly shot up from his bed and started growling, a low, guttural sound I'd never heard from him before. He was staring intently at the sliding glass door that led to our back patio. The blinds were drawn, but I could see a faint flickering light from outside. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the heavy fire poker from the hearth and slowly crept towards the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Cooper stayed behind me, still growling. I peered through a small gap in the blinds. My back porch light was on. The one Dale's note had mentioned was burned out. I knew for a fact I hadn't replaced it. Standing on my patio, his back to me, was a figure. He was holding a small flashlight, examining the lock on my sliding glass door. As he turned slightly, the light caught his face. It was Dale. He wasn't wearing his neighborhood watch jacket. He was dressed in dark clothing, and his friendly, grandfatherly demeanor was gone. In its place was a look of intense, focused concentration. My mind reeled. This wasn't a patrol. This wasn't a friendly check-in. He was trying to get into my house. For a moment, I was paralyzed with a mixture of terror and white-hot anger. Then my survival instinct took over. I backed away from the door, grabbed my phone, and hit the panic button on my home security app. The alarm system erupted into a deafening, piercing siren, and the lights inside the house began to flash. Through the blinds, I saw Dale flinch, startled by the sudden noise. He looked up, his eyes locking directly with mine through the small gap. The friendly mask completely vanished. His expression transformed into something I will never forget, a look of pure, cold rage. A possessive fury, as if I had just ruined his plans, as if I had violated his space. He wasn't scared. He was furious. He held my gaze for a chilling second before calmly turning, stepping off the patio, and disappearing into the shadows of my neighbor's yard. Just as the first sirens grew louder in the distance, the police arrived within minutes. I told them everything, my voice shaking. When they went to question Dale, his story was flawless. He told them he was on patrol, had seen a light on in my backyard that he knew should have been out, and heard a strange noise. He claimed he was merely investigating a potential prowler when my alarm went off. There was no proof of attempted entry, no damage to the lock. The next day, the entire neighborhood knew, and they took his side. I was the paranoid newcomer, the ungrateful city slicker who had falsely accused the man who kept them all safe. Neighbors who had once been friendly now crossed the street to avoid me. I was an outcast. My wife came home and I told her everything. She believed me, but it didn't matter. We were living in a town where our stalker was hailed as a hero. The dream of Silver Creek had become a waking nightmare. We sold the house at a loss 6 months later and moved to a completely different state. I never saw Dale again, but his memory is seared into my mind. I think about that look of cold fury in his eyes, and I realize the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that hide in the dark. They're the ones who hide in plain sight, wearing a friendly smile, welcomed into your community, watching you from the shadows of a perfect tree-lined street.